Billionaire Daniel Hastings will do anything to protect his fragile daughter, Sophie, even install hidden cameras to monitor her new nanny, Hannah. But what he uncovers on the footage is beyond anything he expected, a revelation that will shake his carefully controlled world to its core. What did he uncover, and how will it change their lives forever? Join us for a story of secrets, second chances, and a truth that will change their lives forever. And do let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The glass-walled penthouse of billionaire Daniel Hastings loomed high above Manhattan. His life, once full of laughter and love, now echoed with silence. The only bright spot in his carefully controlled existence was his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, who bore both her late mother's gentle spirit and her delicate health. Daniel's entire world revolved around Sophie, and he kept her life under constant surveillance, her every move viewable through the security cameras installed throughout the penthouse. But tonight, as he sifted through resumes for yet another nanny for his daughter, an uneasy feeling crept in. None of these candidates seemed right. They lacked the warmth he knew Sophie needed. She deserved someone patient, gentle, someone who could bring a little light back into her life. Then, his eyes stopped on a resume with an unassuming photograph. Hannah Alvarez, a pediatric nurse, smiled up from the page, her gaze steady and warm. "She might be the one," he murmured, unaware of how true those words would turn out to be. Hannah Alvarez arrived at the towering Hastings penthouse early the next morning. As she stepped into the luxurious lobby, she felt a mixture of awe and nerves. She had read enough about Daniel Hastings to know he was a man with exceedingly high standards, but the polished marble floors, pristine decor, and impeccable silence of his home made it clear that every inch of his world was under strict control. Escorted to the top floor by the household staff, she finally met Daniel. His sharp gaze assessed her from head to toe, every inch the billionaire she'd read about, formidable, poised, and exacting. Yet behind his cool eyes, Hannah sensed something else, something guarded. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, launching straight into a barrage of questions about her experience, qualifications, and her approach to childcare. His questions were sharp and probing, making it clear he was a man who had no tolerance for excuses or errors. But Hannah held her ground, meeting each question with steady answers. She didn't embellish or try to impress. She answered him with the calm honesty she'd developed over years of working with children and families in crisis. She understood that beyond the job, he was testing whether she could handle him, his expectations, and the weight of the emotional walls he had built around his daughter and himself. By the end of the interview, Daniel's intense demeanor softened, if only slightly. She could tell she had intrigued him. Finally, he offered her the position. Hannah felt her heartbeat quicken as she accepted. She knew, in some inexplicable way, that this was where she was meant to be. And as soon as she met Sophie, that feeling grew even stronger. Sophie's wide eyes met hers with a mixture of curiosity and hesitancy. Hannah noticed the loneliness in her gaze, the yearning for connection that tugged at her heart. With warmth and gentle conversation, Hannah began to break through Sophie's reserve. By the end of that first day, the sound of Sophie's laughter rang through the penthouse for the first time in months. It was a joyful, genuine sound that carried down the hall, softening even the edges of Daniel's heart as he listened from his office. In the days that followed, Hannah quickly became the steadying force that the Hastings household needed. She had an easy, nurturing presence that allowed Sophie to feel comfortable and safe, and soon, the rigid routines Daniel had set for his daughter took on a more vibrant quality. Hannah introduced playful breathing exercises to help with Sophie's health, turning each session into an interactive game. She noticed that Sophie was fascinated by the ocean and used glow-in-the-dark stickers to create constellations and sea scenes on the ceiling of her room. Each night, she'd tell Sophie stories about underwater adventures, helping her drift to sleep with visions of gentle waves and glowing sea creatures. The penthouse began to transform from a quiet fortress into a place of warmth and life. The staff seemed to move a little more freely, unburdened by the tension that had once permeated every corner. Even Daniel noticed the change. Something unspoken yet unmistakable lingered in the air. For the first time since Lauren's passing, The penthouse began to feel like a home, rather than a cold, isolated tower. But Daniel's need for control had not disappeared. One evening, as he walked through his office, he noticed Hannah standing in front of a framed photograph of his late wife, Lauren. Her expression was thoughtful, and she seemed lost in the image. The sight hit him with a sharp pang, and his protective instincts flared. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Hannah turned, meeting his intense gaze with her own calm steadiness. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hastings," she said, unflinching, "but I can't help Sophie if I don't understand what she's lost." Her words hung in the air, their honesty unsettling him in a way he hadn't expected. He'd hired her to care for his daughter, to help Sophie find her footing again. But now, he realized she was willing to confront him too, to point out the unspoken truths that he'd buried with Lauren. Daniel struggled for a response, his anger tempered by a discomforting realization. She was right. He couldn't protect Sophie by keeping his own emotions at arm's length, but he wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. So, he walked out of the room, leaving her standing there. For the first time, his fortress had a crack in it. And though he wouldn't say it, he sensed that Hannah might be the only one who could truly break through it. Late one evening, long after Sophie had gone to bed, Hannah found herself organizing files in Daniel's office. She had been tidying up some paperwork when her elbow brushed a stack of folders, knocking them onto the floor. Papers scattered everywhere, and she quickly knelt to gather them, careful not to lose the neat order. But as she picked up the last sheet, her eyes froze on a line of text. Suspicious circumstances regarding brake failure. Her heart skipped a beat. The report detailed the accident that had taken Lauren's life, suggesting foul play. The words blurred as a chill crept over her, but she couldn't pull her gaze away. She could feel the depth of sorrow and unresolved questions buried within those pages. Who would want to harm Lauren, and why? Was Daniel aware of this suspicion, or had he chosen to bury it? As she absorbed the implications, a shadow fell over her, and she looked up to see Daniel standing in the doorway. His face was clouded with fury as he saw her holding the report. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice low but laced with barely restrained anger. Hannah's throat went dry. I was cleaning up, and it fell," she stammered, trying to find the right words. "That's private," he snapped, stepping forward to snatch the report from her hands. His eyes, normally so controlled, now blazed with intensity. "I pay you to look after Sophie, not dig through my life." Hannah steadied herself, feeling a surge of defiance. "I'm here to help Sophie, yes, but I can't do that in a world built on secrets and walls, Mr. Hastings. If you don't let her understand the truth of what happened, you're keeping her from healing, and yourself, too." His glare softened ever so slightly, though a hardness still lingered in his gaze. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm keeping her safe." "But she doesn't feel safe, Daniel," Hannah replied quietly, her voice unwavering. "She feels isolated, and so do you." Her words struck him with a force he hadn't expected, and his anger slowly began to melt into something far more painful. No one had dared to speak to him like this since Lauren's death, and he wasn't ready to face the truths her words were forcing him to confront. So, rather than respond, he turned his back on her, retreating into the safety of his emotional armor. But for the first time, it felt like a hollow shield. As Hannah left the room, she sensed that her words had cracked a part of him he had long kept sealed. She had no idea if he would let her in or shut her out forever, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't abandon Sophie. The little girl needed her, and she wasn't about to leave her in a world of walls and shadows. That night, a storm swept over Manhattan, fierce winds rattling the windows of the penthouse, echoing the tension that simmered inside. As thunder crashed outside, Daniel paced his study, his mind tangled in a web of emotions he couldn't name. The shadows of his wife's death, the guilt, the pain of almost losing her again in Hannah's eyes were all pulling at his carefully controlled life. Suddenly, a panicked cry pierced the silence. "Daddy!" Sophie's voice was weak, strained with labored breaths. Daniel rushed into her room to find her clutching her chest, struggling to breathe. His heart raced with terror as he tried to help, but he fumbled, his own panic making his movements clumsy. "Sophie, breathe. Please breathe," he stammered, desperate to calm her. Then Hannah appeared at the doorway, calm yet focused, a steady presence in the storm. "Daniel," she said firmly, laying a hand on his shoulder. "We need to help her slow her breathing. Follow my lead." She moved to Sophie's side, speaking gently, her voice a soothing balm to both father and daughter. "You're doing great, Sophie," she whispered, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. "Just breathe with us, okay? In and out, slowly." Daniel watched, his own breath catching as he struggled to match Hannah's calm rhythm. She guided them both, her words steadying Sophie's breaths until they fell into a peaceful rhythm. Gradually, Sophie's breathing evened out, her small body relaxing into sleep. When it was over, Daniel's shoulders slumped in exhaustion and relief. Hannah led him out of the room, down the hall to the quiet sanctuary of the living room. The storm continued to rage outside, but in the dim light, Daniel felt his own storm begin to lift, if only slightly. Sitting on the edge of the sofa, his voice barely audible, he broke the silence. "I thought, if I had been there, she wouldn't have died." The words spilled out, raw and aching, his gaze fixed on the floor as he continued. "Lauren was on her way to meet me that night. I'd pushed her to go alone. I thought she'd be safe." His voice cracked. "If I'd been there." Hannah sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Sometimes, loving someone means letting go of what we can't control," she said softly. "We hold on to the what-ifs, but they only keep us trapped. You did everything you could, Daniel. It's not your fault." He turned to her, their gazes meeting in the dim light, and for a moment, his walls fell away completely. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't felt in years, understanding and forgiveness. She didn't pity him. She simply accepted him, scars and all. Her presence soothed him, a balm for wounds he had long hidden. The unspoken bond between them grew that night, born from shared pain and the quiet strength Hannah brought into his life. Neither was ready to say it, but in the midst of the storm, something between them shifted. They were no longer just a caregiver and an employer, nor simply two people bound by loss. They were something deeper, something that went beyond words. As dawn began to break, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope that he might not have to face his pain alone. And for the first time since Lauren's death, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could let someone else in. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the penthouse softened. Daniel's protective walls crumbled as he allowed himself to open up to both Hannah and Sophie. He found himself drawn to the life Hannah had brought back into their world, and soon, he knew he wanted her in their lives permanently. One evening, he led her to the balcony overlooking the city lights, and with a heartfelt proposal, he asked her to marry him. "You've given me and Sophie a second chance at happiness," he said, slipping a ring onto her finger. "I want us to be a family." Tears filled Hannah's eyes as she accepted. They agreed that Lauren's memory would always have a place in their home, a presence they'd honor, not hide. With Hannah's influence, the Hastings household began to transform in earnest. The family created a memorial room for Lauren, filled with her favorite artwork and memories. Sophie took pride in visiting the room, feeling close to the mother she barely remembered, and Hannah guided her gently through her grief. In time, Daniel found peace in sharing stories of Lauren with Sophie, ensuring her mother's memory lived on in their lives. On a bright spring day, Daniel and Hannah were married at the New York Botanical Garden. It was the ideal place for a wedding that was intimate and heartfelt, a setting that reflected both the vibrancy of new life and the grace of the past. Hannah arrived in a simple but elegant gown that seemed to mirror her gentle nature. She carried a bouquet of Lauren's favorite flowers, white and pale pink peonies, as a silent tribute. Her heart fluttered as she took in the gathering of close friends and family, all there to celebrate a love that had blossomed unexpectedly, but had grown into something strong and lasting. At the altar, Daniel stood, his eyes reflecting a rare mixture of joy and gratitude. As he watched Hannah approach, he felt a profound sense of completeness he hadn't thought possible. Beside him stood Sophie, radiant in a light blue dress, her mother's locket hanging proudly around her neck. She was the flower girl, scattering rose petals with a joy that lit up her face. When she saw Hannah approach, she gave her soon-to-be stepmother a beaming smile that captured every emotion in her young heart. The ceremony began, each word and gesture carrying a deeper meaning for all three of them. When it was time for the vows, Daniel took Hannah's hands and looked deeply into her eyes. He spoke not only as a man in love, but as a father determined to honor the journey that had brought them together. "I promise to be more than a devoted husband," he said softly, his voice carrying through the garden, "but a father who will live fully, honoring Lauren's love by embracing life with you by my side. You have given me and Sophie more than you can imagine, a second chance at happiness." Hannah's eyes shone with tears as she replied, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I promise to cherish the love we share and the family we've created. I promise to respect Lauren's memory and to be the home and heart you both need." Then Sophie, surprising everyone, stepped forward, holding her locket. "I promise to love you both and to never forget Mom, even as we make new memories together," she said, her voice clear and confident. Her words brought tears to many, and there wasn't a dry eye among the guests as Daniel, overcome with emotion, kissed his new wife. After the vows, the three of them shared a private moment together. Sophie took both of their hands, her small fingers interwoven with theirs, and together they looked up at the bright sky. In that moment, they felt Lauren's presence with them, not as a shadow of the past, but as a spirit woven into the fabric of their family. The reception was held under a canopy of flowers, where close friends and family mingled, celebrating the union. Laughter filled the air as Daniel, Hannah, and Sophie danced together under the open sky. It was a dance that symbolized their journey, a dance that now, with Hannah in their lives, they could finally embrace. As twilight settled over the garden, Daniel watched Hannah and Sophie twirling under the stars, their laughter carrying softly on the breeze. For the first time, he felt whole, unburdened by the weight of loss. His family was finally united, bound together by love and remembrance, ready to face the future as one. And in the quiet of that evening, as they held each other close, Daniel knew that love, both past and present, would guide them forward, strengthening them with every step they took. It was a new beginning, but one rooted in memories they would cherish forever. Shortly after the wedding, Daniel bought a beachside house on Cape Cod, a place where the family could create new memories together. On their first weekend there, Daniel watched Hannah and Sophie collecting seashells, realizing how far they'd come. The once cold and sterile penthouse in Manhattan now felt like a true home, filled with warmth and laughter. Sophie's resilience grew, and her health stabilized, thanks to the love and security she now felt. As they strolled along the shore, she looked up at her father and asked, "Do you think Mom would be happy for us?" Daniel knelt to meet her gaze. "I think she'd be proud of all of us." Hand in hand, they continued down the beach, feeling the blessing of Lauren's memory guiding them forward. The night before their first wedding anniversary, a summer rain swept across Cape Cod. Instead of running inside, Daniel pulled Hannah close, spinning her under the drops in a joyful dance, while Sophie laughed and clapped. They were finally free to live, free to love, and free to honor the past without being bound by it. As they danced, Daniel whispered a silent thank you to Lauren, knowing that she had, in her own way, brought them together. It was as if she was there, smiling, watching her family learn to dance in the rain. As Daniel, Sophie, and Hannah's journey comes to a close, we're left with a story of hidden truths, second chances, and the courage to let love in. Through unexpected discoveries and moments of vulnerability, Daniel learned to open his heart and find healing in the most unlikely of ways. Sophie finally found the warmth she needed, and Hannah became the missing piece in a family bound by both loss and newfound love. Now, put yourself in their place. If you were Daniel, would you go to the lengths of installing hidden cameras to protect someone you love, or would you trust without watching? If you were Hannah, would you stay and help a family so deeply guarded by secrets, knowing the risks involved? And as for Sophie, do you think she needed to know the truth, or would protecting her from it have been better? Would you have made the same choices, or taken a different path altogether? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear how you would navigate the challenges, emotions, and unexpected twists of this journey. Thank you for watching.